I know we've probably all heard the famous quote, which may have come from Dr. Benjamin Franklin, or it possibly did, or maybe it didn't at all, in response to a question from Elizabeth Powell, who was a very well-known and influential resident of Philadelphia at the time. Supposedly, as the story goes, they left the Philadelphia Convention on September 17th, 1787, and she asked, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" And his response, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Now, this quote has become almost legendary over the years. It's been used in slogans and campaigns for and against people. It's been used as a book title, all kinds of stuff. But whether it actually happened or not, or how it happened, is really just more of an interesting historical debate. It's far less important than the message itself, which is exactly the message that Franklin gave on the last day of the Philadelphia Convention, 1787, September 17th. I'm going to read through a few sections of his speech, which was read by James Wilson, break down a little of it from there, with more from Franklin throughout the convention and myself, and then we're done. So let's start this out right here. Benjamin Franklin's speech in convention, September 17th, 1787, the day we call Constitution Day. He was pretty old and not a great speaker, so any of the longer prepared speeches throughout the convention he had read by James Wilson, also of Pennsylvania. And here's how he starts it out. This is the beginning. "I confess that I do not entirely approve of this Constitution at present, but, sir, I am not sure I shall never approve it, for having lived long, I have experienced many instances of being obliged, by better information or fuller consideration, to change opinions even on important subjects, which I once thought right, but found to be otherwise." So he's just sharing a little wise, sage advice from the elder statesman of the convention. He's basically just saying, hey, I don't approve of everything, but let's be realistic here. I could be wrong, and maybe I'd change my mind over time. And he goes into some examples of how things have changed over time, or his views and things like that. But then he goes on with this. "In these sentiments, sir, I agree to this Constitution with all its faults, if they are such, because I think a general government necessary for us, and there is no form of government but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered. And I believe farther that this is likely to be well administered for a course of years, and can only end in despotism as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government, being incapable of any other." And that to me is really the juicy statement of that speech. But then he kind of sums it up with this. "Thus, I consent, sir, to this Constitution because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best." He's recognizing that there are people from various backgrounds and viewpoints, and they came together. And he was a moderating force many times throughout the convention. And he ends it with, "I hope, therefore, that for our own sakes, as a part of the people and for the sake of our posterity, we shall act heartily and unanimously in recommending this Constitution, wherever our influence may extend, and turn our future thoughts and endeavors to the means of having it well administered." So I just wanted to kind of read through these main sections of this speech from Benjamin Franklin first, and then go over, well, what were some of his issues? He didn't list out what his problems right there, because he's basically telling them, we all have things that we may not like. I'm very clear that I have issues with the document, but we're at this stage. Let's move forward and see what we can do to make sure that we have it well administered going forward. So some of his issues. We can start out on June 4th. In June 4th, 1787, he said, "The first man put at the helm," he's talking about executive power here, and there was a lot of executive power from Benjamin Franklin throughout that summer. He said, "The first man put at the helm will be a good one." Everyone knew it was going to be George Washington. Nobody knows what sort may come afterwards. But, he warned, the executive will be always increasing here as elsewhere till it ends in a monarchy. So you can see how his message is consistent from June 4th to September 17th. You can't, no matter what you put on paper, you're still relying on the people who have power in office to be good people. And over time, power will always, always grow. As long as you have good people, then you're okay. But it's up to the people to ensure things stay proper or well done, well administered in the future. Here's from a blog over at America's Corner. They describe it like this. Franklin had seen too much of monarchy to want the country's executive authority to be entrusted in just one man. Instead, he wanted this power shared by a small council with frequent changes in the members. He did not want a singular executive. This was very clear. He was opposed, they say, on this matter by Alexander Hamilton, who wanted a single man in charge, and that man to be an executive for life. Of course, sort of an elected monarchy. The delegates split the difference by opting for a single executive to be elected every 4 years. So you had Franklin on the one side who wanted, and others, but Franklin primarily leading the charge for an executive with a council, multiple people as part of the executive branch, and then Hamilton and the hard nationalists wanting kind of an executive for life, and then they split the difference. And, he was also concerned when it came to the executive branch about a proposal to have an unlimited veto power. And maybe he was okay with the final thing at the end, but I'm not certain. Here, Dr. Franklin, and this was on the same day, he had had some experience of this check in the executive, the idea of an unlimited veto power, not something that can be overridden. He had had some experience of this check in the executive on the legislature under the proprietary government of Pennsylvania. The negative of the governor was constantly made use of to extort money. What a surprise. So Franklin's basically telling the other delegates, hey, here's what's happened in Pennsylvania. Let me warn you about allowing a single person to have an unlimited check on what's passed in the legislature. They're just going to use it to their own advantage. He goes on and says, no good law whatever could be passed without a private bargain with the governor. An increase of his salary or some donation was always made a condition, till at last it became the regular practice to have orders in his favor on the Treasury presented along with the bills to be signed so that he might actually receive the former before he should sign the latter. So it was just a system of bribery and payoff. And this presentation really, I think, resulted in James Madison proposing a veto override, what we ended up with and what we have today. And then here on June 2nd, again, talking about monarchy and power. He says, it will be said that we don't propose to establish kings. I know it, but there is a natural inclination in mankind to kingly government. He said, they'd rather have one tyrant than 500. So they can, they feel comfortable with that, is what he's saying. I'm apprehensive, therefore, he said, perhaps too apprehensive, that the government of these states may in future times end in a monarchy. June 2nd, he was saying the same thing that he said as they wrapped up the convention. He was expecting, no matter what they were doing all along, it seems like he was expecting way down the line it was going to end in some form of a despotism. But he says this catastrophe, I think, may be long delayed if in our proposed system we do not sow the seeds of contention, faction, and tumult by making our posts of honor places of profit. And there was a huge debate. For those of you who've studied kind of, or at least done some reading, there was a huge debate over representation, proportional. It was just going to be based on, population or landholders or whatever it may be. And on June 11th, he put it this way. I must own that I was originally of opinion that it would be better if every member of Congress or our National Council were to consider himself rather as a representative of the whole than as an agent for the interests of a particular state, in which case the proportion of members for each state would be of less consequence, and it would not be very material whether they voted by states or individually. Now, I know a lot of you probably aren't going to be in favor of that type of thing because it's not a federal structure, really. But he's basically saying, I don't like the approach, and he actually preferred a single house rather than a bicameral legislature. He just wanted one house in the legislative branch. Hear from Steve Ely over at Liberty Fund in a blog. He said Franklin was fond of arguing for a unicameral legislature, and this is outside the convention, by telling the story of a two-headed snake, which died of thirst because each head wanted to go in a different direction to find water, and therefore it went nowhere. Right at the beginning of the convention, it was clearly stated that Franklin was on board with a unicameral, single-house legislature and not a two-level situation. But he saw that that was going to go nowhere, so he actually was the one who made a motion to have a second branch, which became the basis for Roger Sherman's Connecticut Compromise. And then again, he wanted an executive council rather than a single president, and this came up again on September 7th. He thought a council would not only be a check on a bad president, but be a relief to a good one. And a lot of people don't actually know that the first plan probably for an Articles of Confederation was actually proposed by Benjamin Franklin back in July of 1775. If you're interested in his views on how a government should be structured, this is some early information on that as well. I did an episode on that over the summer, Benjamin Franklin's Articles of Confederation, that I think you should check out. I will link to that, plus, of course, Benjamin Franklin's speech and the blog post, all the other stuff that I'm mentioning here in this episode, over in the show notes section for the blog post for this episode over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Wow, that was a mouthful. Basically, over there, you're going to find all the archives of the show. And for each individual episode, I publish a blog post about 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done. And there you can find all the different platforms we're on, both video and audio-only podcast editions, plus the show links section so you can read and learn more in context on your own time, because I'm just scratching the surface from these speeches and the debates and the like. So anyways, back to Franklin's speech, his Constitution Day speech. What I think are really the most important takeaways are two. First, his prediction that it was going to end in despotism. I think that was pretty intense. He felt things were going to be okay for a little while. But of course, there's no guarantee. He was a student of history. He also understood human nature, and he knew that people over time in the future would demand more stuff from people in power. It's just human nature, and people who have power are always trying to expand it. So that's a pretty explosive situation. People demanding more and people willing to expand more and more and more. We're all flawed creatures. Certainly all of us are. But also another thing that's really important is really a message, and he didn't put it in these words, but words on paper don't enforce themselves. They never did and never will. A constitution can only help promote, but it cannot guarantee a good administration. And that's how he was really closing it out when he said, let's turn our future thoughts and endeavors to the means of having it well administered. And ultimately, for Franklin, and for us today too, it's up to the people to defend their constitution, their own constitution, and their own liberty, whether the government wants them to or not. It was true then, it's true today, and it'll be true for all time. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. More important than anything, I hope you learned something. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. If you support us getting this kind of message out to more people, nothing helps us get that job done every single day more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. You can also help us spread the word by triggering the algorithms of all these different mainstream platforms, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else, smashing the like button, leaving comments. All that stuff will help us get this information and this episode out to more people. I really appreciate your help. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.